All right, Marginal Gains listeners, we are happy to have along to the show this time Alexey. And Alexey, you're going to help me, first of all, pronounce your last name properly. Like, I have marble mouth, so the number of vowels involved here kind of throw me. So give us the absolute right way to pronounce your last name.
The canonical pronunciation.
If you're Dutch, where my grandparents were from, it's Vermeulen, the M-E-U.
Uh-huh.
But nobody in America says that, and even I don't say that when I say it to anybody, so it's Vermeulen.
Vermeulen. Okay, cool. Yeah. And wasn't there a Polish immigrant, too, a grandfather?
It's just my grandfather was Dutch. So
he was Dutch. Okay.
Yeah, he immigrated to Canada after World War II.
Okay, I heard on another show you mentioned he was from Poland, but it was probably from the Netherlands. You probably said so. My bad on that one.
And how about the first name? As long as we're doing names, I'm guessing named after the protagonist in Brothers Karamazov, right?
I've never heard that one. No, I think my parents just liked I think fun names. Like my middle brother's name is Rem, Nicholas Rem. And then my youngest brother, he goes by Vincent now, but his middle name's Moss, which is how he grew up. That's how he grew up talking. So mine, they said they liked the name Alexander, but it was too long, so they just shortened it.
Oh, okay.
So I'm Alexey. Well, nothing special.
As the father of a son named Nigel, I totally get what you're saying, or what your parents were thinking anyway.
Yeah.
Okay, with the names out of the way, let's talk about bicycles and bikes and Alexey's road into cycling. And we always love to start these interviews, Alexey, by asking our guests, how did the bike come into your life?
A random person at the airport asked me this yesterday, but I think a lot of it was just being involved outdoors. My mom did some triathlons. I joined in some kids' triathlons, and kind of like most people, didn't enjoy the swimming part. I enjoyed the running and cycling. And eventually, like towards high school, the cycling part took you further than the running did. And I just kept following the journey, I think, which took me away from cross country toward racing, first around the States and then over to Europe.
What were those early days? So you make the leap out of kids' triathlons, which conjures up a whole image there. It must have been interesting to see little 12 and 13-year-olds running around in triathlons. How did you make the leap, domestically at least, from that to road racing, to just giving the swimming and the running up and right into road racing?
Yeah, so I think at first, like my parents always would help us out with anything. I have two brothers, I'm the oldest, and so it kind of became family road trips. We would, go to the Memorial Day races, go race Snake Alley, go race Quad Cities, and then okay, Alexey, you're enjoying this. Do you want to go race Green Mountain Stage Race? And then that was a 10-hour drive. You'd go to Vermont and race Green Mountain Stage Race, and you do well there. And then kind of leads into, I think I did like a USA Cycling regional camp, and at that time, like there's a beautiful kind of pathway all the way to the pros theoretically, right? Like you start with the regional results, you go to a regional camp, you get results there, you go to a national team camp, you get national results. You do well at nationals, you go to Europe. And I followed this entire pathway all the way, like literally crossing X's off above my bed all the way over to to Europe. I struggle to say that because it doesn't exist like it did back then. But I was lucky enough that it just worked, and my family supported it all.
Yeah. And so your early cycling days were in Michigan mostly, and in that region?
Yeah, all around the Midwest, and then we'd usually do some trips. Like my parents would help me try to get to nationals, and then try to get to one or two other bigger races where you'd get national kids to come.
Mm-hmm. And what were those first road bikes like? Give us a picture of Alexey's cycling N+1 back then.
My first road bike was, and I'll give a plug to the bike shop, it's still around, Aberdeen Bike Shop and Mike Casey. I had a 24-inch wheeled Trek with a Discovery Channel paint job. Yeah, I was all about that bike. Mm-hmm. And then it slowly grew, and I think my first like carbon bike was a Scott Addict.
Nice.
Yeah.
Good stuff
Yeah.
there. Okay. Now,
a question that we've asked. Sorry, Hardy. A question that we've asked a number of times to a number of pro racers is, you've been with bikes long enough now that you've seen big changes. what do you think is the most important change? What is the change you would not give up to cycling now?
Probably, and this is hard because if you're talking about gravel, like what I do now, no, hands down, tubeless, like change the world, right? Mountain biking, gravel. I still like racing on tubulars, so I don't know that I would put that in the same category for the road. I think disc brakes have come a long way, but also, it's just mainly when someone else has them that I think it's a big deal. Like, I think if we were also on rim brakes, no one would complain. I've actually really enjoyed just technology when it comes to gear ratios. Like, I've played around with that a lot. And just now, with derailleurs, with clutches and everything else, you can run gearing that you never used to have. And so you could theoretically have a mountain stage that ends with a hill climb and still run a big gear up front and not worry about it, as opposed to changing it just to suit the finale.
Mm-hmm. And that little 24-incher, what kind of gearing did it have? Like, not much, huh? Even for a kid.
No, I mean, I bet you it had like definitely a compact crank, but maybe even like a 48 tooth front, and then I guess it'd probably be like a 36, 48, 36, 48, 34, and then maybe a 25, probably a 23 in the back.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
How narrow were the tires?
23s for sure at a maximum.
Yeah, I remember riding 21s, back then. It's insanely narrow. And what, 120 psi? I'm going to guess, right?
Yeah,
hard as a rock.
I was home recently, not too recently, and was looking at a set of Veloflex tubulars I used to race on for time trials, 21 millimeters, and we used to pop them out. I feel like it was like 135 or something for time trials. Like how is that even possible?
Well, it's not with a clincher. They'll blow it right off.
Yeah.
All right, so let's go to Europe real quick. What year did you arrive in Europe, and how did that scene go?
Yeah, so 2011 was the big breakout year for me. I feel like everyone has that deflection point in their career, or inflection point, not deflection point. Inflection point where you see just kind of a runway out in front of you, kind of start to plan. I won junior nationals that year, which was really cool. And that kind of gave me the ability to go to Europe and test my mettle over there. And it just so happened that kind of racing was like what I grew up to do. Like kermesse racing, all in, like if you're not at the front, you're at the back. Like they just fit me so well. I got my butt kicked the first race and then kind of settled in. And so planned to go over for a 3-week trip and ended up staying for almost 2 months and ended up with the World Championships in Copenhagen that year. And I, by that point, was just absolutely in love with the traveling and racing.
Mm-hmm. And then you made a deal with your parents, I understand, to stay over there, to kind of forego college and pursue that?
Yeah, so 2011, I was a sophomore in high school, so there's still some time there. So I think at first it was just another year. Now, honestly, 2012 was pretty lackluster. Like if you look at the years in a timeline for me, like I remember that year, like, oh wow, maybe this isn't my sport. But yeah, 2012, at the end of it, I would be going into my senior year, and I was thinking, okay, so where's the process here? There was Livestrong at the time. There's rumors BMC was creating a team. Hincapie had a team. And so you're trying to figure out where you existed within that. And this is the place where, because Americans had never been the best at this sport, there wasn't always the perfect pathway to Europe. You kind of had to feel out what worked for you. And so end of 2012, beginning of 2013, kind of started having talks with my family about what it would take. At that point, I was still spending a lot of time in Europe already, but I was still going to high school, going to normal school, and eventually came up with a deal that I would apply to colleges and I would defer where I wanted to go, accept and defer where I wanted to go, and race for the first 2 years wherever I chose. Ended up being BMC because I loved being in Europe and I thought that racing fit me best. And I deferred Simon Fraser in Canada for 3 years before deciding I was going to keep doing this, keep chasing the dream.
Yeah. And how long did the dream chase last for you?
I would say at each level, I feel like I've had a year that I felt I didn't belong, and I've had a year that I feel like I really belonged. Juniors, that first year for me, like the younger side of 17, 18, I was like, wow, this is great. I'm enjoying this. And then the older side, like 2012, I struggled. 2013, I was like, wow, this is really cool. Like BMC was incredible. We were honestly treated like a pro team almost through and through. And then that second year, BMC, I like wanted to see big jumps, and I didn't really see that. I just think that like for a U.S. rider, especially coming from the junior ranks to the under 23 ranks, it's such a big change in how much you race and how long you race. And so it took me time, and I felt the third year I was kind of coming to myself again and finding my identity. And then literally when I almost least expected it, I had just broken my wrist. I had an email and a call from Lotto, and that happened quicker than I would have ever thought possible.
Yeah. Give us an idea, by the way, from a young rider standpoint. Like how much everyone thinks if you get a pro tour contact, you're a pro rider, they take care of everything. All you have to do is ride and sleep, and that's it. But what does a team take care of, and what is left up to you as a pro rider like that?
I would say like logistics is pretty much almost all covered by the team. Like you can theoretically expect that anywhere you go, they will have things for you. So hotel, the car from the airport, your bike, they're going to have a mechanic, they're going to have someone to give you massages. Sometimes a chef, but if not a chef, they're going to have set up something up with the hotel. So you're never going to be stuck in the cold in that regard. You do obviously travel with bikes and stuff when you're going to, like, depending on different races you're going to. Like sometimes, hey, we're gonna travel with your race bike, but you need to bring your training bike as a spare bike, or you're gonna go to this training camp after, so bring your bike. And then there's races also just like world championships or such, where you're kind of in between the national team and such, and like that was one of the most complicated travels I ever had, going to Doha, Qatar in 2016. I had 4 bikes plus 5 sets of wheels and a suitcase, and you need 2 rental cars and a semi truck to carry all that. But it's majority of it is all handled for you, and it's more of just the extra things you want to do in between, or like how you live, like your apartment, where you want to live, how you want to set up bank accounts, stuff like that. That's all on you.
Okay, got it.
Yeah.
And then at some point, you decided to leave Europe. What were the reasons behind that? What pointed you back this way?
First off, I think it's interesting that you don't get to really choose sometimes when you go up. Like when you have an opportunity to go, it was great. Like I think looking back, I was probably a year early. Being 21 years old is probably a jump for me. It hurts to say now watching Remco, but it's true. But no, I think I was ready to kind of see what I could do. But no, I think the decision to move back kind of came from, I just felt in one part that the world tour is somewhat flawed in a sense for someone who enjoys talking or being involved in the community, or just interacting with sponsors, like whether it's feedback. But all of those teams want one answer from 28 different riders, not 28 different answers. Mm-hmm. And I completely understand that as well. You're running a program. It's like there's a hierarchy, right? I'm not going to go talk to the boss who's putting in the money when there's 3 other people below him who are supposed to do their jobs. So that was the first thing. And the second thing being that I think I quickly realized it's really, really, really hard to race up there successfully. And it's hard to find longevity. And I was like, if I'm going to jump now's the time to jump and try to create something different. That's 23, turning 24. And I 100% was not full of it, was not sure of it. But I think part of me was just like, if you don't fully enjoy this, you're not going to be doing it when you're 35 or 40. And so if you ever have an opportunity to create relationships, now's the time to do it. Mm-hmm. And that's always what I've enjoyed beyond. Like, I love the racing side of it. I'm a very, very competitive person. But what I remember from the whole pathway through the road ranks is all of the certain people who help you, or those people you keep in contact with. It's not the people who signed your contracts. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, I think at some point I just kind of realized I wanted to see what else was out there. And I got lucky enough that I feel like I jumped 1 year before gravel really blew up. And then after that, like 2018, I feel like I was iffy on it. And then 2019, I was like, oh, this is what's going to happen.
Was there any, when you were in Europe at the time, just before you left, was there any word of gravel? Was that even a phrase over there? Was there an awareness yet?
I think it existed, but it exists like it does now. Like you're still, I think they were just out riding. We all had road bikes and we're like, oh, we're going to put 25s on, or 28s on instead of 25s and go ride on a dirt road. But it was more of an adventure thing. Like, oh, we're doing an endurance ride. Let's try to connect these two roads. But it wasn't like it is in the US by any means. And I think that's the difference between a lot of what Europe believes is gravel in the US, and in my opinion, is I don't believe gravel by definition is the road type. I believe it's the people. And you have to figure that out quickly because Europe has this background and history of racing that gravel doesn't. And I can say it another way that's less fancy than the US. Unbound's cool, but I will never feel I could win Unbound, or I could be in the breakaway and finish 5th like I did this year, and it won't feel like being in the breakaway at Liège. And if I get dropped and don't finish the race, right? Because that race has 100 years of history, and Unbound has 7 or 8.
Mm-hmm.
But I am interested, though, in the sense of community issue that you noticed in the World Tour, and you're one of the, I would say, rarer people who really is focused on community and on the personal relationships. I think that's borne out in the second part of your career, the part you're in right now. What would you change in the World Tour to allow more people-friendly, people-focused people?
Longer-term contracts. I don't believe, like, even for myself, I tell companies, 1 year does nothing for anybody.
Right.
Like, even if it's money or relationship or anything else, public vision of it, I can't jump to another company and people think it's authentic that new company actually is better, because it's not the truth. That's part of what being a professional is figuring out the different angles or why something works for you. But I think longer term contracts would help a lot. And then more focus on how to bring the team together, and you have this cohesiveness as opposed to you're the worker bee and you're the leader. You need that hierarchy, and I think that will come in gravel, to be honest. It's not always going to be just, we saw it this year. Gravel is very competitive at the same time. But you can still have the finish line be accessible to people and not have barriers. And so I think a lot of it comes from the teams, but there's also a rich history of how things have happened.
Yeah.
Sure, yeah, for sure, lots of history. But is there a difference in the personal level? I mean, for the racers themselves, something that racers could do to make that change?
Possibly. I mean, I'm always afraid to speak for people because I always try to remember that there's a chance I just wasn't good enough, right? And that's why it was hard and everything was stressful. Like, that's the reality of this. Like, I look at Sepp, and Sepp has found every piece of love for the sport over that I think that he needed to find, right? He just married his wife now is a Spanish woman that that is his place now, right? And I think that's part of it. That's why it's so hard for any sport that is so far away from home. If you can't find your place, that can make everything else feel out of place. So I'm afraid to speak, but from my viewpoint, I think it just longer term contracts would allow relationships to exist that are special, right? The same as I don't want to work with a brand for 1 year. Like, you have 3 years with someone, then you spend time in a hotel room and at training camps and everything. You don't see that person as an enemy or someone taking your contract. You see them as a friend.
Yeah. Okay, so we get out of Europe and we're back in the United States, and here comes gravel, right? I mean, it's starting to really bubble up in a big way. What do you identify as you come back this way as your opportunity? What are you seeing on the horizon there?
So 2019, my coach and I have worked together since I was 14, 15 years old. My parents first brought him on more as like hey, this kid's kind of crazy. He wants to do too many sports at once. Can you help him pick what sport to do what day? But yeah, so Lucas and I, my coach, have worked together pretty much through and through. Lotto brought in a coach, but still Lucas was on my training peaks, which is cool. But so that first year, 2019, we really decided I just wanted to experience everything. Of course, you're going to be competitive, you're going to race hard, but don't peak for anything. Just ride through the year. Try not to be stressed. You're going to be overwhelmed. And there's so much that I learned that you even see now with World Tour pros coming over to race, whether it's plugging a tire or figuring out what PSI to run. That is really stressful when you move. right? Like you have to, people think it's like changing a tire is a relaxed thing. Like it's so different mid race when you're watching guys pass you as opposed to when you're sitting on the side of a trail and you can try to get things done. So I think the first thing was like, okay, let's get through this year. And I focused a lot on mountain biking that first year because that's how bad my skills were. I wanted to focus on racing on the dirt, and I thought it'd be easier to transfer. And then 2020 happened. So 2019, I kind of ended on a high note with Iceman, which was cool.
Yeah.
But then I kind of had this weird place. And so Lucas and I kind of went back to the same thought process, but even easier. We were like, okay, how often does any athlete in any profession get a year off? So pretty much the minute, like I did training camps and stuff in February, but the minute we knew COVID was it was like, I trained, I rode my bike for fun. And we picked some like fun things. I did a 100-mile time trial, and just like did around a fun area. But like majority of it was just like ride your bike and have fun, like take the year off mentally, like pretend like you have a whole year of off season and enjoy the bike. And I think that was really healthy. And it took me back into, I did 2 races at the end of the year in September, with Belgian Wall Ride Cedar City and Pikes Peak Apex. And really just went in like, who knows where I'm at? Like, shit, let's just go ride our bikes in the desert. But that's also where a lot changed. Moved out to Boulder that year after COVID, during COVID. And so it was a good year, I feel like, to adapt to the altitude and try to figure things out. And then 2021 is where I was like pretty much built out a full schedule that was much more equal mountain biking to gravel.
Yeah. Yeah.
It is so weird how many people I have heard talk about how COVID changed their career, right? Not because they had it, but because there was a year without racing and there was some opportunity for introspection and for a year of riding for interest and for fun and rediscovering what they do. I mean, conduct this thought experiment for a second. There was no COVID. What would be different for you right now?
I don't think very much. That feels arrogant to say, but I think my greatest quality as an athlete is that I've always had a very good viewpoint on what I am doing. First off, I'm very much a glass half full person. So, like, example, the year I won Iceman, the day before the event, I backed my friend's Jeep with a quad rack and his son's bike into a tree. The entire thing, like, mangled.
I've done that.
But it's not like you're driving his kid around. It wasn't like this friend that I'd had for a really long time, and I was able to just like, okay, like it is what it is. Like reached out to friends, found a bike for the kid, like got the Jeep back, dealt with it, and then went out and raced my race the next day. And so I think I've just always been able to compartmentalize things when I have to. And so, of course, I enjoyed COVID and it allowed me to do things stress-free. But at the same time, like I can point to this year, for example, like I valued going to watch Sophie, my girlfriend, race in the Commonwealth Games 8 days before Leadville in the middle of an altitude camp without a bike. So I went to the UK for 5 days without a bike and just enjoyed it and lived my life, and then came back and got back to work and did what I could. And so I don't know there's many athletes that can do that successfully. And it's not the physical side of it. It's the mental side. You have to be able to just truly be okay and use the time you have off as downtime mentally. And when you get back to it, don't skip a beat.
That's a great thought experiment there, Fatty. Imagine what your life would have been like had there been no COVID. That's an excellent one. I'm gonna think about that when this podcast is done. I'll get back to you on that.
And ask Josh anything episode.
I know the BWR San Diego has become a big race for you, Alexey, and this year in particular, it seems like you came into that event with. Look, you're a cool guy. You're a very nice guy, but I felt like there was not anger, but there was a little revenge maybe in your heart, a little
intensity.
Well, he probably always races with intensity, but I'm looking for the right word to describe it. Anyhow, I watched your race vlog on it afterwards, and there were some shots and some narration from you before the start of the race, and you could tell like there was something in your eye. You wanted that thing bad. So the bottom line is you won the race, and you won by 6 minutes, and you dropped the Pro Tour rider. But tell us about BWR San Diego. Like how big of a deal was that to you this year? and how do you feel about that result when it's all said and done?
Yeah, I think it was massive. Honestly, just as an athlete, right, we go through life not winning things a lot. And even if you have a good viewpoint on it and you see the glass as half full, it's still hard to keep training when things don't go your way. And that is the majority of gravel. Like 2021 for me was a piss poor year. Like it's not that anything went bad and I tried to put a smile on, but like flatted 8 times at Unbound, flatted out a Belgian waffle ride, 20 miles to go in the lead group. Like it was kind of never ending is what it felt like. And it wasn't that I felt like I didn't put the work in. It all has to click. It has to click on the road even more in the dirt. And so I think, yes, a Belgian waffle ride, that was the 3rd time I'd been there. And I felt that race fit me so well. Like you have this mix of quote unquote road or world tour power mixing with having to have skills downhill. Belgian waffle ride this year was even more complex than it's been in the past. And I pretty much just focused on getting the job done and racing my race and not worrying about everything else that happens behind. And, when push came to shove, I was like, well, if I flat, hopefully I'm far enough to the front, I can fix it and keep moving.
Yeah.
So I think there was some intensity in there and some anger. And I think that's what you get from a lot of these races. You're going to see beautiful results from people because if you go back to the same place over and over and over, you tend to learn exactly what to do to fit that course into your athlete profile.
And correct me if I'm wrong. Did you rode an Envy bike there? That was what is now the Melee, and how proven was that machine to you, at least, before you mounted that thing for that race, a very important race?
It was proven to me. I mean, that bike, there's a lot of bikes, and this is what I talk about, with loyalty with companies and believing in something, is like, I jumped on that bike and I was like, wow, this thing's sick. It was something that it just felt like all of my favorite bikes in one. And so I took that opportunity to like, okay, how far can I push the limits of this bike, which a lot of companies don't enjoy, right? I mean, I talked to Neil and made sure everything was okay. And I think it was all good and great until they told the engineer after the race, but it was already done by that point. But yeah, I shoved big tires in there that probably weren't great. They didn't rub. I was like explaining to them, I was explaining to Neil like a week out from the race how I was testing, and I was like throwing dirt inside the fork and then like sprinting as hard as I could to see if it would like touch it at all. And I was like, I think is this the way to do it? Because this is the way the world is trending. Bigger tires can roll faster if you have bumpy courses. And so yeah, that Melee did what didn't exist at that time, and I think that was kind of made it even more special for me because I got to just like go out and ride my race and think that I felt that I had the best bike, which is just also a confidence boosting piece. And yeah, I couldn't have been happier. I was so stoked but it was funny because at that time, the only thing released on that bike were the components. The tires didn't exist, the wheels didn't exist, the cockpit didn't exist, the frame didn't exist. So it was one of those things where you're just like, I think Avery, like one of the guy who does all the video and photography stuff for me, he was like, should I call Neil and see if that bike has to disappear right now? And Neil was like almost crying. He's like, I'll just leave it. They can deal with me later.
Well, because what were your other choices? Now, you're also a Factor athlete, and Factor supplies, this is kind of a crazy setup that Alexey has. He's a Factor Envy athlete. Factor, which makes drop bar bikes and makes a gravel bike, supplies your mountain bike, and then Envy supplies your road bikes.
Yeah, arguably great Factor gravel bikes too. Like that,
right? They make beautiful. A gravel bike. So was that an option for you if the Melee wasn't ready or wasn't what you needed? Was that even an option going into BWR?
I think it would have been an option because that's just like the friendship relationship you have with Envy. Like if I had told Neil this bike doesn't work, he would have figured it out.
Okay.
But I did going into this year sign with Envy for road and gravel and sign with Factor for mountain bikes. So that was the split. So I would have pretty much theoretically done almost anything to be on that Melee for Belgian waffle ride because I also very much I felt that was the best bike for it. Right? It's a very good road bike that can fit in almost gravel tires. So I don't, it's like, that's the issue with these things. Because you can push the limits of a bike doesn't mean it's made for it. And so I don't know that a gravel bike would or is the best option for Belgian waffle ride San Diego.
Since we're on the topic of BWR, I've done the race myself a couple of times. We saw some we saw your approach, a winning approach to BWR this year with some widest tires, you should say. I think a lot of your competitors were going narrower. Give us some, from your perspective, some approaches people should consider when, and they're obviously not going to be at the front of the race, most of them are, when considering that event, because it is very particular. There's more tarmac involved. It's generally a faster race. What are some of your pointers and your ideas that you take into that race regarding mechanics and equipment?
Yeah, I think the technical aspect is what's changing gravel for the most part, right? We're still a little bit behind in terms of supply chain, but that race in particular, I feel like I did a lot of testing with tires and gearing and trying to figure out what worked best. And, do I want to run a wax chain? Do I want to run a lube chain? Why am I going to run that? Is it going to be, it's dry and dusty out here? Like what? Yeah. Anyway, all these things go through your head and you try to figure out not only the fastest bike, like theoretically in a wind tunnel by numbers, but also how you're going to ride that bike. When you talk about gearing, it has very little to do with, in my opinion, it's very little to do with your top end speed or your low end speed, especially in a race like that. It has a lot to do with how you ride a bike. So if you climb out of the saddle a lot and you're going to need to be cross chained, like, okay, you got to go to a smaller front chainring so you can keep that leverage and just enjoy climbing out of the saddle and stay more in the middle of the cassette. And I think that's something that, Avery did a video on it that I just enjoyed doing. I enjoyed figuring that stuff out because it's fun. You go pre-ride the course, you have time, you're with friends, and you're just like, oh, that does not work. That was not the right. For me, I'm out there and I feel it. Like, you have to be honest with yourself because you're worried about how it's going to change in the race. But I was riding a 52.36 on the pre-ride day, and I was like, this just doesn't. It's like I feel like I'm pushing a little too hard in every single uphill. And so ended up going to 50.34, which, I was literally talking to Pete Stetina, the guy who had won the last 2 years, leading into that, like at the end of the day, and he was like, "Oh yeah, I think I'm just going to change from 50.34 to he's going to do the opposite." Mm-hmm. And so you have to stay in your own head and in your own lane and believe in what you're doing. And that's the same thing with tires, right? I think the biggest anyone had underneath me was 34s. Right. Most guys were running 32s, 33s, and even that was a jump from years past because the race got a little bumpier. But yeah, I'm proud of myself because I put time into doing the research and then believing in my choices.
Mm-hmm. And apparently you're unafraid to change things the night before a race. Like, Fatty and I on our other podcast tell people, ride what you've been riding for like a month before. But I've seen you change chain rings at least twice. I think you changed your front ring for Schwamigan the night before the race. You changed your full crankset before BWR. So you have this ability, obviously, to wrench on your bike and make last-second decisions, and you have confidence in them, right? You just say, look, I'm going to go with this, and I'm going to make it work. Type of attitude. You don't worry, fret too much.
Yeah, for sure. And I actually agree with you. Like, I tell everybody not to make changes. I think the big difference is that I'm not changing to something new or something unused, right? You're either having a new chain, a new cassette, and a new chain ring, or you're using something that's been used before and you're putting it back with the same chain. And that's actually why it's one of them moments that you see me use, like Belgian Wildfire is a good example. You see me use Silka's super secret chain wax as opposed to putting on a wax chain because I was putting on a chain. I wanted to have everything be at a similar level. But yeah, it's sometimes scary and it's sometimes not purposeful. Like even Leadville, I was doing bike maintenance the night before, but I tend to try to find balance in what I do as a professional athlete. And a lot of times the mechanic side of it does come last in priority list.
Mm-hmm. Okay, let's roll into the Lifetime Grand Prix then, which was another. First of all, how many of the BWR events did you do this year?
I only made it to 2 this year.
You made it to 2 this year because, of course, there's 6 Lifetime Grand Prix events, plus the other events you enjoy. Obviously, the Last Man Cometh. I'm assuming you're going to do that. Mm-hmm. You did is it Barry-Roubaix, or what's the opening race you did in April before Sea Otter?
Yeah, Barry-Roubaix.
Barry-Roubaix, yeah. So a massive schedule for you. But the Lifetime Grand Prix, that was, I imagine, the centerpiece of what was going on for you. And you took 2nd overall. We're talking to Alexey just days after the final event there in Bentonville, Arkansas, and you held on to 2nd overall. Keegan Swenson just kind of ran away with things. But your 2nd place was definitely threatened going into the weekend, and you held on to that. But I want to talk about, as a whole, the Lifetime Grand Prix. Now that it's done and you finished it, the inaugural round of this thing, what did you like about what you saw? What would you change if you were overseeing things?
I don't know that I changed very much. I mean, I think I've been trying to be very honest with myself. Again, take myself out of that athlete viewpoint and view it from above. But I don't think any of us, we had kind of thoughts in our head for what it was going to be, but nobody really knows, right? I think at the beginning there was a lot of people saying, oh, so-and-so is going to run away with it, or, the point system's too close, or there was all these excuses for things. But in the end, you got what everybody wanted. It was absolute fireworks in the last race, which I think that makes for any series, especially when they're creating content. They're going to have, a Drive to Survive-esque series on the back end of this that grows cycling, right? It is interesting for everyone to watch, whether you understand the sport or not. So overall, I was stoked. I mean, I think it's hard to focus for that amount of time, and it's hard to really peak for any race because you're pretty much just hitting a race a month, which is really difficult. Yeah. And the races are so different. But honestly, for me, that's what brought me pride, is the difference in races. It's one thing to go out and smash Leadville. It's one thing to go out and smash Sea Otter or Unbound. But to be consistent throughout the year was the goal from the beginning, and is also something that I'm proud of, having not done some of those races and getting through it without too many mechanicals is a blessing. Especially when you're changing stuff the night before the race. But no, I mean, for me, there's not much I would change. I mean, I believe in what Lifetime's trying to do, and I'm really supportive of it. I don't want it to alienate other races. I love the Belgium Off-Ride Series. I love what Michael Marks is doing, and I think that's the biggest thing, is trying to find space in the calendar for people to make decisions and choices. And I do also think that Lifetime understands that as more people come into the sport, you're still no race can take 10,000 people. So you have to separate it, right?
Right.
How do you figure that out? And I think that will be more possible next year, to pick races you want to go to and still go to other ones. But yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing is for me, it's going to be how it grows into season two of the series. Do you have the same people come back? Is there new protagonists? Does it wane? I think it sounds like they're going to do the same 6 races again next year, which from an athlete's perspective is awesome, because you know what you got into. And if someone had a bad day at Unbound, the same as I did at Belgium Off-Ride San Diego 2 years ago, you can rectify that, right? You can say, oh, how do I change this day for me? And you can get analytical about it. You can get really specific on your nutrition or anything else, because you have the ability to do that because you've done the race. You can look at your power file from that year and say, this is how much I burned. This is what the weather was like. So from that perspective, I love it. I worry about that in 5 years or 6, 10 years time. If the Grand Prix is still around, are we still going to Emporia every year? And that's the crowning achievement for gravel. I love going, but how do we continue to find new places? It's the best part about bike riding. That's what I fell in love with when I was, 14, 15, 16, 17, is the travel, the journey, where you get to meet the new people and see new places. And so I think that's my biggest question, is how does it change over the next coming years? I have very few complaints from this year.
So I want to conduct yet another another thought experiment. Okay, suddenly you Kimo Seymour has come to you and said, Alexey, I want to add one more race to this thing. I think it needs to be a real mountain bikers race, something that I've heard other folks who have done this race say that they kind of miss from this series.
Or the opposite, a real road race.
Sure, I've heard that too, but let's start with the mountain bike one.
I mean, I'm close to this, right? Because I am the weird, as it's gone around for the last few days, adopted mountain biker. That's been my coined term. But no, if there was going to be a true mountain bike race added, which I think is great, right? I think we should all be using using a full spectrum of bikes is the fun part, and none of us at the front. Nobody in the top 5 used a full suspension once this year. Which I think is telling, right? It's if you have roadies using hardtails, I think that Leadville can be I don't believe it's a gravel race. I think it's a mountain bike race at the front. But at the same time, you have to figure out where you can use the full range of bikes. So I think if you were to add that race, maybe making it, you can drop 2. So allowing someone who has that, has a struggle with that race can just, go in and not be too stressed about it and enjoy it. Because I think you have to remember that it's easy for me to talk as someone who had 2 years before this and enjoyed this entire process. Mm-hmm. I can't imagine having if 2019 had been this year, there's zero chance I would have been on the podium. I would have fought with the same power that I have, in my opinion. But all of the things that got me through, like quickly plugging a flat at Unbound and chasing back on, like that doesn't exist. Alexey doesn't do that in 2019. It's 2 minutes on the side of the road. Yeah, I would love to see a mountain bike race in, and I would also love to see a road race in, but there's only so many events, right?
Mm.
Yeah. So is there a specific course that you would add? Let's say if you were going to pick between a favorite mountain bike and a favorite road bike course, if there is one, what would it be? What would you add?
In my opinion, I would add, if you're going to do a true mountain bike course, you're going back to Bentonville. You're throwing in, like Oz Trails, what Epic Rides put on was a true epic mountain bike race, right? Like, you had to focus the whole time to get through that, which I think is cool. And it doesn't favor anyone who's a great climber or anything. You have to be good at climbing. It's death by 1,000 cuts, whether it's your tires or your body. But I don't know. In me, that's just a place that sticks out to me for a mountain bike race. And they're ready for it, right? You tell them how to create a course for the Grand Prix and they'll do it. Like, they'll find anybody, they'll make a new trail, which I think is beautiful.
Yeah.
Road biking, I've actually screwed around with Chemo and other people about this a lot. Like, to me, because I raced, people freaked out when I did this, but before the first Grand Prix race, I raced the road race at Sea Otter. And mainly just because I love bike racing, and it was an opportunity. Very few races are together, right? Where you can do that. And I think you could possibly do, you could bring back the Carnegie Road Crit, or you could do just a circuit race on Laguna Seca. Both of those options to me are not too alienating to someone who hasn't been on a road bike very much, but you're still going to see people struggle. Like, I truly believe most mountain bikers, and I will say most because Keegan is an impeccable little boy. I hope he listens to this. But no, most mountain bikers will struggle to keep speed on road tires, right? It's a very, very different act. And it's why, like I was talking to Rob Britton, it's so different. You think you'll understand because you've descended to high speeds that I could just jump on a gravel bike or a mountain bike and just go. But it's this process of seeing a line and following it on a road. Whereas on a gravel bike, you see the line, but you let the bike do what it does because it's gonna slide. Like every single descent at Big Sugar this weekend, I was like, I am almost in the freaking woods right now. But you know those things, right? You try to figure out how to make it better for yourself, whether it's tires or different things. Like I ran the Envy Dropper this weekend, picking little things that I was like, that's a little bit of help for me to get around these corners. So yeah, no, I'd probably say stick at the beginning and end because people are more motivated to be there and hang out and do things. So yeah, maybe add the road race in at Sea Otter and mountain bike race at the end. Let's just do 8 races. No problem.
Why
just
not?
Keep adding on.
Why not?
Yeah, well, therein lies the rub. We were speaking earlier about how worn out the athletes are, especially the ones that have been in the Grand Prix, yourself included, Alexey. We've heard other stories from people saying not only physically they're worn out, but mentally. The athletes, the people who follow this thing, I mean, it's been a wearing event. So they do have to be careful about what they're adding, maybe if they add something to subtract something. But certainly there are opportunities. Look, there's opportunities maybe to do some type of stage race. Right? Leadville's got one built in already, so maybe instead of doing the LT100 one year, they instead line it up for the stage race. You get 3 different stages. You award points for the overall plus points for the individual stages. Maybe there's a time trial, some type of uphill time trial there. So there's ways, I think, to mix this thing up and make it interesting and yet hold on to those big events that people look forward to, too, as they move forward on this thing. Excellent. Let's continue our gear talk, though. Marginal gains and all, right? So what you've obviously started to gain some off-road marginal gains over these last few years. We're kind of getting an idea, I think, what's been working, and if you want to highlight those again, what works? What do you like? Are you a chain waxer? Do you like a lube? Yeah. And what's not? What have you experimented with anything that's gone? That clearly didn't work.
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to say I'm a full chain waxer, but I have yet to like set up the full station myself. I pretty much beg and ask Josh and Travis to come help me out from Selka, because Travis was over at our house the night before, Big Sugar. But no, I very much believe in chain waxing. I think it also has its moments where you got to figure out how to use it correctly, right? Like like Big Sugar, sorry, is a great example. Like it's so dusty out there that even with a great wax chain, it starts making noise. But like talking to Travis, you figure out that like wax is not water soluble, right? So if you spray your cassette off, the sound goes away. It's just a mental thing that you feel like you're losing watts.
Right.
But you have to realize that, because like there was a moment where I was like, what the frick is my cassette making right now? But it's the only time this year that's happened. So I've loved wax chains, honestly, even more just for the longevity. Like the amount we race and the way things go, like you can abuse equipment, and it's nice to like, I feel like it helps chain rings, cassettes, and chains last longer, which is great. I also am a big proponent of clean bikes, and wax is much cleaner than lube spraying everywhere and trying to clean that off your frame. But yeah, I think so. Drivetrain wise, that's probably the biggest thing that I've focused on. Again, gearing, a lot of that focus for me has all been on chain line, and how I feel. And I believe in gut being a marginal gain sometimes. I think people sometimes overthink the way they do things. Like Schwalmigan, for example, has all my best friends, Keegan and Russell, idiot, like put the 38 on, you're going to lose, and like, I wrote it and I was like, this is not it. This isn't the thing. And then kind of, from there figuring out, I think the marginal gains beyond that for me are learning the races and figuring out how to not stress yourself out before. Like, okay, what do I have to pre-ride? Having courses planned before I go. This is my Strava route. Or like, this is how long I'm doing altitude. I'm not going to do anything else during that. Like, to me, Leadville is not, at the pro level, is not worth it without an altitude camp. Like, I can't go and expect myself to achieve a podium without doing an altitude camp. It's just too high. I can't. It's not that it's anything crazy, but the moment where the race breaks is always at a place that will put you too far in the red and you'll never come back from.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then tires. I guess tire choice has been big. But so those are probably all the things. There's a lot to think about.
Yeah.
There's a lot. And I want to sort of zoom out for a second and look at what I'm going to call macro marginal gains, right? You have done this series of races over, 5-6 months, and you've done extraordinarily well. I mean, taking second in this thing is incredible. That isn't just down to how well you trained and how your bike was. There are little things that you had to have done in order to edge out people who are equally fit and has equally nice of bikes and probably have similar nutrition plans. What did you do? What little things do you do over a big series to stay sharp and stay strong and be able to make it to the next race ready to go?
Yeah, I think balance is a big one. People throw that word around a lot, but to me, figuring out your balance with where you think and what you think you owe to sponsors and people who help you get to races is important. Because you have to be able to have that conversation to know what they expect from you, either at a race or on the race course the next day. Because you can have these big expos and you can be walking around for 12 hours and you're like, wow, my legs are kind of shot right now. But I've very much gone by this entire year that, like, I've set it up in my head, tried to make it simple. Like, simplicity to me is the key, is that Thursday is my day. Any day before Thursday is my day too. Like, if I get there earlier, cool. You just go pre-ride, you go look at everything, you set your stuff up. The day before the race, the day of the expo, to me, that is their day. No matter what, I set myself, like, if I had an hour and a half on the schedule and I got 30 minutes done, okay, that's what it was. And you can't lose mental energy over that. Because if you're like, oh my God, I missed 60 minutes, you are so worried about that, you're not even focusing on being the athlete you have to be at the expo, which is, in the end, when you distill it down, that is our job, to sell bikes, right? To be a part of this, to be in the community, to help people learn what they should buy or how they should buy or when they should buy. Because I think that's, I think that's the cool part about bicycles is, like, you can change and create everything depending on what you want it to be for yourself, right? Like, you can make a drop bar mountain bike now. I don't think I want to ride it, but you could. And so that to me has been the difference. And then, I say, okay, so Friday's theirs, but then I also put time limits on those. Okay, 3 p.m. is the goal to get out from pretty much every expo, and 5 p.m. for me is like a no matter what, hard cut, I'm out of here. Like, and you do that, and to me, 5 to 10, I can always get whatever I need to get done. Like, I have 5 hours to get dinner, get the bike ready, shave my legs, do some mental talk, go through bottles, make nutrition, talk to whoever's feeding me, and just relax, sit in the Normatex, whatever it is, So that's worked for me. There are other people that I think would struggle with that more, but I also I believe that an athlete's benefit is a good portion off the bike as well as it is on the bike. I was very proud of Leadville because yes, I took fourth. I was very happy with it. I raced well, but also I didn't sacrifice anything leading up to it in terms of being the person off the bike I wanted to be, which I think is hard in a series like this.
Yep.
I think
in fact,
Leadville in particular was a real case study for you because you weren't just there doing that race, which was also part of a big series, but you were also with a bunch of very novice athletes who were also wanting to do that race and also producing a television series at the time. I mean, honestly, when you talk about making sure you have time for yourself, I mean, that seems like something that you must have been incredibly intentional about.
Yeah, I mean, but I think that's the point of it, right? Is you feel better when you do everything, and in some ways, yeah, having from the ground up there and having everyone around makes it harder. But at the same time, it's also easier to take yourself out of it because you're these people are about to take on the hardest race of their entire life, the hardest thing they've ever taken on in their entire lives. For the first time, they have no idea what they're getting into. You're just going to go to another bike race tomorrow. You're going to be done in 6.5 hours, 7 hours. And to me, it's very easy for me to step back and say that is ridiculous to think that my life is more stressful than theirs right now. So yeah, but it was definitely busy. And I think I have this thought process towards sleep that I think people stress about. I sleep very well. I will sleep. If you guys said, hey, Alexey, we're going to see if you can sleep on the podcast, I could just sit here and sleep in 5 minutes, honestly, I bet. But also leading into a race, those days that are mine, I do my sleep. But I kind of expect Leadville and Unbound are prime horrible examples because of from the ground up and everything I had to do. But I bet you in the 3 days leading up to those events, I slept 12 to 14 hours max.
Wow.
It was, both nights before were 4 or 5 hour nights because it's just, I have too much to get done, too many interviews when it's myself, you're having a personal brand that has other partners as well as a project. And then you're helping them prepare their nutrition and what they need to do. And they're worried about it, teaching them how to plug a tire, things like that. But if you are intentional about that not affecting you negatively, I don't believe it does, right? I'm absolutely smashed the next day and I will sleep until whenever I want to. But sleep to me is yes, it matters, and a sleep pattern is important. But if I worry about it, it's only going to affect me more.
Mm-hmm. Plus, we saw you hanging out in the Silka booth at the expo too the day before. So you had a full plate. From the ground up, folks. If you don't know, that is a series that Alexey and his buddy Ryan put together, where they took 3, and this is the second season they've done it. There's going to be a third. They took 3 absolute newbies to mountain biking and put them in the highest, hardest one-day mountain bike race in the country, which is the Leadville Trail 100 mountain bike race. They helped them along the way, got them equipment, got them some training, but they were largely, too, up to their own devices. They had to get ready for this event. They had to balance life and work. And when we say newbies, folks, we mean, look, if I were picking first-timers, I could have picked first-timers that probably had a better chance than the first-timers that Alexey picked, and that I'd have probably gone after swimmers who had never ridden a mountain bike before, or runners, or bike packers, or anything. We're talking about folks who really were foreign to this whole thing, which makes it amazing. Now, they're 0 for 6 in the 2 seasons, but I think there's a larger story here, right, Alexey, in that not only were you bringing new people to mountain biking and the Leadville Trail 100, but you're bringing people, completely outside of the norm, the normal people we see at these races, which are largely white male, right? Yep. First of all, the 4 of your 6 contestants so far have been women, which is great. And they come from completely different backgrounds. My question is, and it seems like it seems like that was a very intentional approach on your behalf and on Ryan's behalf.
Yeah, I'll try to make this short because I can talk about this forever. But from the ground up started, like we did a lot of it falls back to COVID and it's trying to figure out how to balance everything. And I was doing a ride with Ryan. I just moved to Colorado. We were riding from Boulder to Crested Butte, probably the hardest way you possibly could for some reason. It's a lot of time to talk when you ride for 10 hours with someone. And we were trying to talk about how to positively affect the new wave of riders coming into the sport, not because of anyone who'd race professionally or some shiny new bike, but because their gym closed or they needed mental sanity. And it changes the whole way that you look at the sport, right? You forget how alienating our sport can be and how elitist it can be. But that doesn't mean it can't be fun for everybody. If you give people the tools to understand how to enjoy it, they will. And I think the hardest part during COVID was that the same that people came into the sport, all of the community sides of it disappeared, in my opinion. The group rides, the crib practices, the things that like brought us all together. And so from the ground up is just, like in a simple way, is trying to lower the learning curve and make the sport more accessible, because that's what I think makes all of us enjoy it more. Gravel's a great help to that. And like you said, like the goal of Leadville, I want someone to finish eventually because I'm competitive for them.
Yeah.
But I mean, you asked people who are crossing the line at 12 hours. Like we had a woman this year we asked, and she had done 2 Ironmans and completed 15 marathons. And she said Leadville is the hardest thing she had done. It's one of those things that is not meant to be possible. It is, how do you get yourself, whether it's off the couch or out of off the computer working, and focus on something that you can dedicate your life to for 6 months and see what changes come. And a lot of it's not even physical. It's just mental. It's setting time for yourself and being intentional about what you care about. And so, yeah, I'm from the ground up was almost one of those things that was like, oh, this will be a 1-year thing and see how it goes. And it has been incredible, the response that we've gotten. And it's something that I would trade in for most races to be a part of.
Yeah, because it took me a long time to figure it out too, because I was watching the series myself going, man, these folks just don't seem to have a shot at this. Like I was looking at these contestants going, there's no way they're not going to, and they it has been rough on them. And it took me a while to kind of figure it out. Like, oh, I see. The bigger picture here is not that they're going to make it, because they probably won't. I mean, the odds are against them. The odds are against me making it Leadville, against most of us. I mean, it's a hard event. The idea here is, hey, look, this is the gateway. This is how cycling can be done. This is how fun it can be. And these are the different faces we can bring into cycling. It doesn't have to be how it looks normally.
Yeah. Yeah, so you finish Leadville, right? And you say, oh my gosh, I will never have to go that hard again in my life. And then you choose to go back next year. But that's a whole other story. But you can go do Leadville and then you're like, that thought process to like, I just took that on. I was scared of it. I trained for this. I did this. And then you go do a race like Schwalm again that's not at altitude and is 40 miles long and has 3,000 feet of climbing. You'll enjoy it and you'll be able to be intentional and actually race your bike there. And I think that's the point of it, right? I would never tell someone to go make Leadville their first race unless I am able to be like, hey, this is how hard this is. Like when we first talk to people, we're like, the first, like even these are off camera conversations, like the first interview post like an application, do you understand, like, if you succeed in this, you'll be riding your bike for 12 hours? And I think even then they say yes, but they don't understand it. Right. By the time you get to July and we take them to, like, a training camp in Leadville and they ride the course over 2 days, they get it. And it's like you said, it's one of those things I keep learning about how hard it is. And, like, the first year we, like, tried, like, I think Enzo would have made it past the first checkpoint had he not had we not paced him. And this year we told everyone just race flat out. You get through 45 miles, great, keep racing. We'll keep giving you food. But, you learn something new every year. And I think that's the goal is hopefully you carry on that thought process toward every other race you do. And I mean, yeah, in my opinion, aside from Leadville, maybe Unbound is harder, but there's literally nothing else harder in the U.S.
Yeah, the hardest thing I ever did at Leadville was not getting myself across the finish line, was trying to get somebody else trying to pace somebody else across the finish line to their goal. It was just so hard to do. It's very, very difficult to do to achieve that kind of success. So we look forward to season 3 of that. From the ground up, folks, you can see it, and there's no paywall involved, by the way. Even though it's on the Outside TV network this year, you can see it for free. Let's circle back to our original topic, and that was American racing and, getting getting American racers over to Europe, as you did, Alexey, successfully, but there seems to be, that highway seems to have narrowed or is being cut off for some reason. And so I want to ask you, as somebody who's kind of been through the ringer over there and gone down that road, first of all, how do we open those? Is it important that we keep those lanes open, that we keep sending young American men and women over to Europe to race on those big stages? And if so, how do we improve that?
I think it's really important. I mean, I still think like gravel and mountain biking can grow, they can skyrocket, and I still think road riding is important. That's why I want to keep go racing road nationals every year. I think it becomes hard, but I do think there's an offside weird way to have the Grand Prix be that start toward validation of racing in the U.S. again. To me, what the Grand Prix added is this structure and validation that anyone can look at and point at and say, wow, that is, like, at every single one of these races, there was, to a degree, the best of the best that we have in the U.S. racing. I think as the Grand Prix grows, that will be solidified even more as people get in or people decide they do or don't want to do it. And that's going to be a big question. But you look at the years past, almost all these races sold out, but very few of them did you have the firepower. Like Leadville was the most stacked I think anyone has ever seen it, ever. Mm-hmm. And you can go back and say, oh yeah, well we had Alvin Makata here one year, we had so-and-so, but like this year I could have pointed at 15 guys who I thought could have won. Of course, Keegan's up at the top, but like you look at Lachlan, you look at Alex Howes, it's never ending, right? You look at Russell Finsterwald, it's one of those things you're just like, it's hard. You have to stop thinking about who's there because you end up thinking, I'm going to finish 21st and hate my life the whole time. So I think adding validation or structure to U.S. racing in general is great. And then aside from that, I think there needs to be a future where USA Cycling works together with promoters that are putting on gravel races and mountain bike races and adds a pathway or validation structure to an already important license structure. I'm not saying gravel races need to be counting toward upgrades, but if it's a validation toward, hey, I just won this race in my area and there's no road races, you can't force juniors to have to drive 3 hours to go do a road race. That's the biggest issue right now. I think roads continue to grow. I don't think it's dying. I think it's struggled for a minute, but I do think that the history will always keep it afloat, especially in Europe, and which means we'll still always have Americans going over there. But we do need to figure out how we support them in the middle years, which to me is between like that under 23 year, between juniors and the professional ranks. And yeah, I mean, you hope people just get chances based on racing the gravel races right now because it's kind of what exists.
Mm-hmm. And BWR needs to be part of that narrative too, I think, right? I mean, they're certainly putting on enough strong events that feature drop bars that they could be a gateway and a helper in that area.
I think all the promoters of USA Cycling, they all need to sit down, and I think the problem is that they're two differing thought processes, right? Because nobody who has gotten into the sport, because like nobody who had applied from the ground up had any desire to be involved with USA Cycling, and they shouldn't have to pay for a license to do a race. That's what's been beautiful about gravel. But you have to find a line where, hey, maybe to be included in the point series or to be involved or to have upgrade points, you need to have a license, right? There has to be a new ground. It's not the way it was on the road because that doesn't exist in the gravel because gravel is very different. But I would love to see everyone get together and create something special.
Okay. Excellent points there. I totally agree with that. Final thing here. We want to check on I don't know if he's the second most famous person in your household. That's Willie, the fastest known dog. How is Willie? Folks, you should check in on Willie both on Alexey's Instagram, and I think there's a video done about Willie, right? Am I true on that?
Yeah, Pearls made a video last year. I would say Willie's the most famous person. I mean, I had a person this weekend at Big Sugar ride up to me on the Lifetime Grand Prix pre-ride. Goes, oh, you're Alexey. You ride with Willie? And I was like, yeah. And he's like, oh, is he here? And I was like, no, he's back home in Colorado with my Sophie. He's like, okay, bye. Rode off.
That was it.
Rode off. So I think there's many people who would rather the dog than me. But it's really fun. I am very cautious to tell people to ride with their dog because people crash a lot. I don't think people think about how much I put a lot of thought into how I'm riding and when I'm riding. I very rarely ever ride a drop bar bike with Willie just because I feel like I have less control. But But it is a game changer. Let me tell you, you don't have to train with a camelback for Unbound. You already got an 11-pound dog on your back. You got someone to talk to when you get bored. And yeah, I don't know. It's just, there's no one who's going to complain about that. I've had people yell at me and flip me off and then turn around and come say, hey, nice dog. So.
That is so crazy. I got to ask, first time you took this dog on a ride, what were you thinking? You're like, I wonder if my dog would climb into a backpack.
Yeah, honestly, Sophie got him a couple months before I was in the picture, and she was just like, she didn't have a car. She was going to University of Michigan, and it was a way to get around with the dog. He was into the backpack. And then it kind of like, when we started dating, he started getting into it more because it's during COVID. I was training less, and so I'd be like, oh yeah, you're going to go run? I'll go ride beside you. So we'd ride at a very leisurely pace beside her while she ran. And slowly just kept taking him further and further, right? You realize like he is more into it the more interactive you get. Like when he will fall asleep going uphill sometimes, and then going downhill, he's like, I am into this. Or like mountain biking, he hates goggles, but he'll wear them and then just not move his face, just get hit with everything. He's like, oh, these are the protectors. So I don't know. It's just such a fun thing, and I do think that's where cycling struggles, right? Is the human part of it, and finding this. Breaking down barriers, and the dog does that, right? You can be someone who got into the sport last year, and I feel like I am more relatable because of a dog, which is somewhat stupid, but I will not pretend like it's part of the brand now, and I love him.
We love our dogs, no question.
Yeah.
All right, Alexey. Well, thanks so much for coming on the Marginal Gains podcast, sharing some of your wisdom and some of your thoughts about the future of cycling. We've got a long, we have to continue to focus forward on the sport, to keep it growing, to keep it happening. We won't have Marginal Gains if we don't have people riding bikes and people willing to race and people, willing to jump in Unbound or Leadville or all of it. So we want to thank you for promoting and being a part.
Yeah, I love it. And I think that's what makes me listen to this podcast. It's fun to always hear what other people's little gut thoughts are.